Hello, this is Tanis from Inner Circle Sanctuary, our mother coven here in Las Vegas, Nevada. And it is my good fortune this morning to be speaking with one of the busiest priests, high priests, community leaders that I can think of, Thorn Nightwind. Good morning, Thorn. How are you doing?
Oh, good morning. It's really great to speak with you. Thank
It's
you.
really it's great to be speaking to you finally as well. Thank you for doing this. And how are you and your covens doing in the age of COVID?
So far, doing pretty well. Obviously, not being able to see each other or meet with each other as much as we would like to. So a lot of things had to change, like with that, and relying on bits of more technology and things like this to be able to stay more connected and chat with folks. Obviously, like everybody else, lots of events have been canceled,
Yeah,
throughout this year and probably will into this new year. But, being able to stay connected in ways that are safe and at the same time still give everybody the emotional, mental, and spiritual support that they crave and need in their lives right now. So
right.
we've fared it okay. But obviously we would love the pandemic to be over. It's definitely not ideal, but we've all had to adapt to new ways of doing things.
Yeah, for sure. And are you using online chats like this to do rituals, or are they mostly casual? Are they like business meetings type of thing?
Well, a little bit of all things like that you had mentioned. One of our folks that hived off from our group here in PA in Texas has really organized these like monthly calls, like monthly video calls
Yeah.
that have been very, very wonderful to do, where we'll do meditation.
Uh,
We will talk about various topics. Sometimes it's casual, sometimes it may be about certain magical topics that people want to discuss, and just checking in and being able to do that.
yeah. Is
We haven't done many, like, say, online rituals or anything like that, but we have done what we've been able to do. And that's been very productive. Like in the summer months, it's a little easier because we could be outside and be able to be in a safe space,
yeah.
smaller numbers and everything like that, following all our state guidelines. But the videos have been very beneficial, and it's given us the opportunity to connect with other folks that are all over the world. So,
Right.
like, we can, and that's always fun in terms of time zones when you're talking, when you're scheduling time. And some people are getting up at 3 a.m. in the morning sometimes, depending on the time,
Sure.
to be able to do some of those calls like that. Some of, like, our far-flung kin, I guess you could say,
Hmm.
that we would not see as often, we're able to see them a lot more often, and other people get to know each other. So that's
Yeah.
that's what we've been up to.
That's cool. And it's, I mean, it's kind of taken on its own thing with the online meetings. It's not the same, but it's kind of its own thing, and it has some pluses to it, like your far-flung kin, and being able to connect with them even online.
Oh, most definitely. Yeah, like it's been, that part of it has made us think in new ways of being able to connect with people that we miss and love, and gives a chance, like, as well, for a lot of new people in that are training or being mentored in other covens, that can connect with people they may only see either very frequently, very infrequently, or not even at all, you
Yeah.
know? So in some ways that's been one highlight, is learning to be able to adapt and do that. There was a lot of talk at one time that this type of thing could never be done.
Right.
That how could people stay connected, with just being online? Well, of course, like, it's upsetting, and there's lots of various folks out there that are going through emotional struggles of being detached, and we don't want to underscore that by any means. But we're learning how new ways to be able to cope and adapt and be able to provide support to those who may be struggling because they haven't seen family members or been able to be in contact with the people they love for so long.
Yeah.
So that part of it is being able to be worked out. And so there's some highlights within this whole thing.
Right. Yeah, that's cool. And the coven you talked about in Texas, is that from Gala Witchcraft?
No, the Coven in Texas is a Horsa group
Okay.
that had hived off from our group, and they do really wonderful work. They're very, very wonderful people.
Okay, so now one of the reasons why I called you like the hardest working man in witchcraft is because of you are a, if not the leader, you are a, from what I see, a leading member of like three traditions, or at least two, and a mentor of one. So sacred pentagraph, Horsa tradition, and Gala tradition. And maybe you could explain what these are, and kind of how they work, and
Oh,
how they hived off, stuff like that for people that might be unfamiliar with them and how they work.
oh, sure, yeah. Like, in a lot of sense, all three of them are related in some form or another. When it came to being part of a coven, being an initiate, I got my start and initiation here in Pennsylvania through a coven that was a very old coven in here in Pennsylvania that was started by a couple folks who owned and operated a medical office here in PA.
Wow.
And they were mentored and trained and initiated by Sybil Leek
Nice.
back in the mid 1960s.
Uh-huh.
And so I basically ended up getting connected with them when I was in college. And I know I'm jumping ahead like in some of that, but when I was in college and my younger days, very passionate about the craft. And another good friend of mine, she was very passionate about the craft. And we started holding Sabbath rituals, like, very eclectic in nature at her property out in the country. And they were mainly all outdoors, except for a few exceptions in the winter
Yeah.
when we couldn't be outdoors. So in the ones that we could be outside, we might have invited friends that were about 30 to 50 people.
Wow.
Indoors might be like 15 to 20 people or
Mhm.
so. Much smaller when we have to be indoors. And the Sabbats themselves were very, very wonderful. A lot of people slept over because they went all night.
Yeah.
We had wonderful rituals around this really large tree and this large fire circle. A lot of times there'd be fire spinners. Sometimes it would be DJ'd.
Wow. Wait,
There was so much fun, and
that sounds awesome. Now, what time frame are we talking? Because I left PA in '88.
yeah, it was definitely much later than that.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, definitely later than that. I'm definitely younger than you. So it was
It
definitely
seems that
later.
everybody's younger than me nowadays.
That's okay. That's totally okay. Um, but so during these wonderful Sabbaths, and people who haven't experienced things like that, it was truly remarkable. I look back on it with such fond memories. It was a lot of work, but um, wonderful at the same time because like you really got to learn through trial and error in that way
Yeah.
how to be able to um, lead rituals, work with other people of varying different levels because the people that would come to these circles we're not all initiated Wiccans of
Right.
any sort. There would be people who were various forms of paganism. There
Uh-huh.
would be at times even people who were Christian. I remember a number of instances where a couple ordained Christian people would come to these rituals.
Uh-huh.
You'd have solitary, eclectic, some people from a local OTO group would come. And out of that, there was also a couple folks that were part of the coven that I was initiated into that would come to these as well, that were much older folks. So you had all sorts of age ranges from 18, 19 years old, all
Uh-huh.
the way up to people in their 60s and 70s,
Oh,
being
nice.
able to get together. And the people that were connected to that coven that would come to every Sabbath that we had done, I got really close with them. Like, there
Yeah.
was just like this special connection there,
Sure.
with them. And we became good friends. And like almost every other like Saturday or Sunday, I remember going up and visiting, hanging out, going on walks in the woods and all of that. We just became really good friends. And after a few years, I asked to be initiated.
Hmm.
And basically, they were like, "Well, it's about time. We've been sitting on our hands waiting for you to ask." So that's how I had met them and got initiated. And that coven was started in the mid 1960s.
Wow.
And Sybil Leek was very instrumental in starting that.
Yeah.
She was the original, high priestess's mentor in
Okay.
that. And I pulled like a little quote from one of the articles that she wrote, where she says, "I was lucky enough to be ordained by a very famous, wise, and wonderful witch. During my apprenticeship, I would be given bits and pieces of information about my newly adopted religion. I wondered often why I was taught in this way. I found out later that all would-be witches must do the searching." And that seemed to be like the style and manner in which she taught, like
Yeah.
in which Sybil taught. Like you were never just spoon-fed things.
Right.
You were never given any type of, in that sense, formal lessons. Now, some covens today, like back then and today, do very formal types of trainings and lessons. But she would, even then, she would still say things like, "That's for you to ferret out, my dear." Uh, little bits of information to be able to um, bring what was inside out. And it also was a very organic style. Of course, there was, written rituals and things like this that were passed down, but like part of those those pieces that like would become like oral tradition, it was very much about um teaching you something where you bring it out, you become the witch. Like
Huh.
nobody makes you into a witch. You have to become that in itself.
Very cool.
And
And
that's how it started here in Pennsylvania. And we did that and still continue to do that. Um, Now, when it came to, let me see. So like, to give you an example of that, sometimes certain things were given and you were told to find the answer. Like, Edna had said that the first set of books that she was told to read by Sybil at the time was Sir James Fraser's The Golden Bough.
Yeah.
Now, of course, like everybody today is very familiar with the Magic Art Volumes 1 and 2 put together in one book. But back then, when they were written, the first two sets in the 1890s, and then like the next 12 volumes that are part of the Golden Bough, were written clean up until like somewhere in the 1930s.
Yeah.
So it's like a 12 to 14 volume set. And I'm looking at my set of it right now across the room. Sybil would say, get these books, read them, and you'll know all there is to know about the craft as well. And, and it's like, geez, that's quite a mighty task.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of like, and in today's standards, books like that, may be out of date. They may not be as sensitive and, pass the test by all standards by today's means. But back then, there really wasn't a lot of witchcraft and Wicca materials that were out in the public.
Right.
That you couldn't just go to the bookstore and buy tons and tons of books. Like this was even before Sybil wrote Diary of a Witch. So, which was a massive, massive big seller. So, there wasn't a lot of books out there. So people had to find and read whatever they could.
Right.
And that's how they would do it. So I kind of like try to liken the idea of Wicca as as a belief itself to the idea of a strong oak where its roots are well planted and its branches are reaching upward. And the object of what we try to live by in our religion itself is to live in harmony with, not only harmony with yourself, but harmony with other people in the world around you, and harmony with nature.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and and there's tenets like part of the religion that kind of help us guide that as part of like a philosophy.
Right.
That we try to maintain. And here's like another quick example of like how you would be taught in some ways. And this is another note from another article that she had written down where she says, I wanted you to try spell to gain something that you might want badly and scoop out a hole that's in an apple and gather spring or rainwater and put that spring or rainwater along with like a few drops of fluid condenser or magical oil into that apple and concentrate on what you want badly. And when your concentration breaks, bury the apple in the ground. And as it decomposes, your wish will come true.
Right.
This spell is from my friend Sybil Leek. It teaches you concentration, which is a very good thing for witches to have.
Yeah.
So some of the activities were not just to get what you want or to make certain wishes come true, but the idea of teaching you how to concentrate, teaching you how to focus your mind on one thing and one thing only.
Right.
So it was quite amazing in how that was kind of taught. And sometimes you'd ask certain questions and you might just get like a chuckle of, yeah. Let me know when you figure that out.
I've noticed that kind of about her books, Sybil Leeks, that they, like you said, they don't give you, instructions on everything. This is do this, do this, do this, do this. They are very is expository the word? Like she writes about it a lot and very informative, but not necessarily do this, do this, do this.
Oh, exactly, and that's exactly it. And that was a different way of writing back then. It's very different than like a lot of books that you see today that's filled with, oh my gosh, like hundreds of exercises that you have to do, where it's almost set up like a curriculum. You read like these 3 pages, and now you have 7 specific exercises to do. That's a very different model than what some of the old teachers back then had done. Now
Right.
there were exceptions to that. As I said, there are some covens and traditions that make it a point where they have very strict curricula based lessons that
Yeah.
they have people go through, and
Yeah.
that was very different than what was the norm. But that's where I got my start, when, as an initiate
Yeah.
itself.
And that, I mean, as far as covens, groups, and even traditions, I mean, we're looking at 50 years now. That
Yeah,
that branch of Sybil Leek's tradition, just the branch of it, we're
yeah,
looking at 50 years now that you're carrying on, and it seems to be kind of a renaissance of people's interest in Sybil Leek. Like I just watched a video last year from a young witch in England who did like a YouTube video biography of Sybil Leek, and then Kerry Wisner just had a book come out that I mean he quotes and talks about Sybil Leek quite a bit. So I thought it was interesting. It's almost as if people are rediscovering Sybil Leek and her work.
yeah. It really does seem like that. When she was alive in her day, she was definitely the most famous of all the witches that were out there, and um, was somebody that not only fit the mold itself, but kind of brought the idea of not just witchcraft but astrology itself as
Yeah,
well to the kitchen table, where people would see her on the television, they would hear her on the radio, um, they'd be watching an interview with Barbara Walters, and
yeah,
across here comes Sybil Leek, or various things that she was out there doing, or even her work as a medium.
right,
So at the time period, she was definitely the most famous of them, and people are definitely rediscovering some of what her legacy was. And we've always been small, at least here in PA, we've always been small in that type of way, because most witches, for example, and most Wiccans, you find a lot of them around very big metropolitan areas. And
right.
I mean, you're familiar here with Pennsylvania, there's a lot of rural areas still
Oh
remaining.
yes,
And, so the coven like just went on in a very rural area. And, it wasn't centered around like the large metropolitan areas. So it was a very different way of working. And pre-internet age, before the internet age, you had like the newsletters and things that people were putting out. Like I
right.
swear every coven in like the 60s and 70s seemed to have some type of coven newsletter that
Yeah,
they were swapping back and forth.
yeah,
That was kind of like your only outlook or contact with people in a lot of other areas of
right.
people that you didn't know. And a lot of groups remained very private and very secretive as well. It was a
Yeah,
very different time. And in some ways, people still need to remain secretive. Um, some people can be more open, and that's very wonderful when they are able to be and when they feel comfortable to be. But, there's still a lot of people who prefer to practice their religion in private. It's not, for the masses.
yeah,
So, you have quite a mix of different types of people that like to do that. And the rituals themselves, can help create like not only that sense of harmony, but helping you obtain things such as like a balanced life, and all really can change your life
for
in
sure.
many different ways. And a lot of that can be very hard to describe to somebody who's never experienced it. Like if you've never drank coffee before, how can somebody describe to you what coffee tastes like?
Right, good point.
You know, the feeling that you get like when drinking coffee. How do you
Yeah,
describe that? How do you describe its taste? How do you describe what chocolate tastes like if to somebody who's never had it? So like there's a lot of things that remain unsaid until you get the opportunity to experience it yourself.
right. Yeah, we have a lot of people in our coven that need to stay, keep their witch identity under wraps. That's why we like the magical names and all that kind of stuff. And for you know, like when you were talking about back in those days when it was not as open, there might have been kind of a camaraderie as well in like, yeah, I know who you are, and we know who we are. Nobody outside our little group knows who we are. It was kind of an interesting feeling that way.
Oh, exactly. In a lot of different groups, for example, there were some groups that talked to each other, but there were a lot of groups, for example, that did not talk to each other. Like the idea of uh, different covens or lines and traditions working together, um, that wasn't as common at back in those days. Like the autonomy was a lot more autonomous back then.
Uh-huh.
So, you might have like maybe the high priestess and the high priests or somebody that might know people in this other coven. They may not know them well, but they know they're related to them somehow.
Yeah,
But they didn't really intermix or interact with each other once that coven like had kind of hived off at that time period. They may not really know who those other people are, and over a
right.
period of time as people age and people pass into their next incarnation, those connections sometimes could even be forgotten about.
Sure. Yeah. Well, and one of the, just to kind of bring it back to Sybil Leek, the connection that we kind of have uh, between her covens, your coven in PA, and she did spend some time in Las Vegas out here. And while
Yeah.
we were not initiated into any of her covens or anything, what she did for Las Vegas was take the city of Las Vegas to court
Mhm.
because psychic readings, tarot readings, rune readings, crystal ball, astrology were illegal at the time,
Yeah.
probably because of fraud. Probably because the city wanted to cut down on maybe image or in actuality people being frauded or defrauded, however that, whatever. But so she took them to court on religious terms,
Yes.
saying, you're violating our religious freedom, and she won. And of course, you can get tarot readings all over town now. And to last time I checked, to be a legal, and I'm doing air quotes right now, a legal psychic reader, the application is, oh my gosh, it's a good stack of papers, and they really want to know into your background. They just really want to know that you're not a con artist. So I
Yes.
kind of get the feeling that was the point of the prohibition against it in the first place. But our high priestess, Lady Morgana, used to tell us that in the '90s, and we thought that was super cool. And then when Tarostar has his website,
Mhm.
witchworld109.com, he talks about that because, of course,
Yeah.
he spent so much time out here in Las Vegas, which is another tradition that you are a very public member of.
Yes. Yes. Tarostar is amazing.
Yeah.
Out of all of he's going to hate that I say this, but as out of all the occult teachers that I've had, his wisdom and the way he does things in his teaching, he's been like the most impactful on my personal life.
Oh, I can see
And
that. Absolutely.
Yeah, just amazing, and we're ever grateful, to everything he had taught and what he had shared. I got in contact with him um, a number of years back,
Mhm.
and I had no clue at the time that he had known Sybil or worked with Charmaine or
Right.
anything like that. Some of the earliest books that I had read, like on the topic when I had started was a few of the books by Tarostar, like The Witch's Spellcraft,
Yeah.
A Book of Shadows, and I loved them. I
Right
just
on.
loved the style. I loved how they worked in everything like that. I just loved them. And also Sybil's Complete Art of Witchcraft was the republished 1990 something edition of it
Uh-huh.
was some of the first books that I read. I had no clue that they were connected or had known each other. And I contacted him and we formed a good friendship and he trusted me and I started learning with him. And it was, I mean, as I said, he was the most impactful, and he still is, because he's still kicking. He's
Yeah.
up in age, but he's still kicking. He's great. He's doing good. Um, and he has been the most impactful, and it's been amazing how the tradition has carried on. Like it's on
Yeah.
multiple continents now of people that have hived from our coven in Sacred Pentagraph,
That's so cool.
multiple countries, um, groups in various locations, and a lot of new people who are learning it
Yeah.
itself. So it's been great, and so like in reality, like before it got to Las Vegas, what became Sacred Pentagraph started in Houston, Texas.
Right.
And Charmaine Day and Sybil Leek, they had met at Houston's Theosophical Society because both Sybil and Charmaine were involved in the Theosophical Society, and Charmaine also was involved in the Liberal Catholic Church for Theosophists that was
Uh-huh.
housed at the Theosophical Society as well. And
Interesting.
they became really good friends. And when Sybil wanted to move to Las Vegas, Charmaine and her husband Steve went along. So did Glenn Hilkin, who was, I think he was like vice president of like her astrology schools, like or one of the enterprises that she had ran at that time.
Cool.
And I always loved as well Charmaine's little candle magic book, The Magic Candle.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And a lot of people don't know some of that history related to that book. That book, like back when they were still in Houston, Texas, there was a hoodoo candle shop that was there. It was an old one.
Bishans.
What?
It was at Bishans.
Yeah, that's it. Yes. And her and Sybil had went there on numerous occasions, and Charmaine really, she really loved the high ceremony, but
Yeah.
she also really loved, the magic of candle burning and the magic of oils and things of that nature. So that book represents kind of like a cross between where it is pure that style from that hoodoo candle shop mixed with some of the things she was learning from Sybil.
Right.
And she just loved it. And so when Sybil wanted to move to Las Vegas, Charmaine went along and wanted to open up the Bell Book and Candle that you're familiar with.
Oh yeah.
And so yeah, as you said, after she won like against the city, and and Sybil opened up the astrology school, Charmaine opened up the occult shop, the Bell Book and Candle there. And that's when Tarostar, came in, and you can really tell that like Tarostar was definitely very special to Charmaine, um, because as she was still learning different things from Sybil, and he would come in and kind of go through the notes that Charmaine had taken and all the things she had learned. He would be able to put a lot of them into written form,
Okay.
and they would decide how things should be changed and developed at that time, because it was a little bit later of a time and a lot more people were getting involved in witchcraft, and you had a lot of big egos and cults of personalities that were beginning to be set up.
Yeah.
Or as Tarostar always calls it, like big fish in small ponds.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and so some of the changes that they were trying to implement was trying to prevent some of the big personality, big personality cults where
Right.
groups were centered around like this one big influential figure. So when you read, like, for example, the Sacred Pentagraph book, you don't really you won't really see a lot of information on the history, the people who were founding the group there, the people who were influential and making it take off, and in the and that seems to be done very purposefully, because one of the things Tarostar had told me before was they really wanted it to be about the work itself and not about the people.
Yeah.
Like, not about the personalities.
Right.
So keeping the work focused on Wicca, on the great mother goddess, on the father god, and on nature and the rituals itself, they there's like a real purposeful effort to make sure it's focused on that and not into um like a big bio
Yeah.
of sorts. And that's really good, and it's really amazing. I know, like, I had bugged Tarostar for a number of years to be able to share some stories back then, and he was kind enough to tell me some of them, because a lot of times when you start learning, you want to know about some of these elders, you want to know about these elders that came
Right.
before you, right? And and sometimes at first, you're like, why don't I know more about them? So thankfully he was able to share a little bit more over time.
That sounds so. That kind of explains how my interview with Tarostar went. Was I was so stoked to talk to him, and I totally fanboyed over him, and I think I annoyed him.
Well, he's very direct in his
Oh yes.
answer, like very direct. He was in the military in his younger days, and very, very, very Aryan in his answers, very direct. He will lead you to that answer, but it will be in a very direct way.
Yeah.
And as I said, like, it may sound like he might be annoyed with something, but like in reality, I don't think he is. I think, he does have a really great sense of humility in those answers, and
Yeah.
that he does not want people to focus necessarily on the people. He wants it to be focused very much on the work.
Right.
And I understand that, because I'm a little bit like that too. Like, I don't do a lot of interviews. I've collaborated on a number of books, but
Yeah.
like that other people have done, but like, and I've contributed, as well, but I haven't written anything like that myself, because, like, I'm kind of the same way, where I tend to focus more on the work itself rather than trying to do anything to
Yeah.
make a name for myself, because I in some ways, when you are really out there in the public, you're not as free as
Right.
what you are when you're more so in the shadows. So
True.
so
And I do.
celebrities and
I
things
do.
like that, how often are they truly free?
Yeah. And I get that, and I do see. Part of you're posting stuff on Facebook all the time for your coven. Your blog posts quite frequently. You're in Thorn Mooney's book, Traditional Wicca, quite quite frequently. So I see you out and about with your writings, and it but definitely, like you said, you're not out there like trying to drum up business or make a name for yourself.
Right. I try to keep like a lot of it about pieces related to the traditions,
Yeah.
pieces related to the covens, and trying to keep the focus on that, not about like necessarily myself as a person, because I'm just one of many. Um, and we have a lot of folks that really don't care for a lot of social media, so I kind of get regulated into helping post a lot of the stuff
Uh-huh.
that we post, and that's totally cool. Um, so little bits here and there that I will post, like like you can see a picture in the Sacred Pentagraph in the first book. It's like page 46 or 48 of us, a little setup of when we performed the centering of the cone. And Tarostar included the photo from our Coven temple in the
Yeah.
book. And, so little bits and pieces like here and there, and in a number of other books. And yeah, Thorn Mooney's book is wonderful. Like, she's definitely great. She's definitely a very down to earth type of person, and I consider her a friend.
Yeah.
But she does very well at keeping like a very good balance out in the public. And so yeah, Sacred Pentagraph has been it's just so instrumental. It's been like, and as I said, Tarostar's been the most wise and impactful teacher into my life that we're ever so grateful
And was that all via correspondence? Because he lives in Canada and you live in PA. Or has he come down or you gone up and met in person?
Mainly because since he lives in Canada, mainly through correspondence back and forth, and but so mainly most of that has been in that area, and that was very common at times past when
Yeah.
people lived in various different places. We still end up doing a lot of that today with
Right.
people who live in other countries that we don't get to see very often. And that's one of the reasons we said that, like, now that everybody understands how Zoom and GoToMeeting and all these other things work, that we've been able to connect with people that we don't get to see as often as we would like. That you may only come, you may only get to be in contact with people on a few times a year. So I mean, that's been one of the really great things about that. But yeah, there's all sorts of folks, like, all over. Like, there are some people who are very public. I know we had talked a little bit before. You had mentioned about Gala as well, didn't you?
Yes. Yes. Casey Giovinco. Is that how you pronounce his last name?
Yes, yeah, that's it. Yeah.
And he
He-
lists you as a mentor in, I think, several places. So
yeah,
how did Gala come to be?
yeah, Gala came to be. Casey was trained and was initiated in our coven here in Pennsylvania. And as he got on in years in the craft, he had noticed that in some instances, for example, that there was not there was an erasure of the impact of other sexualities and orientations within Wicca.
Yeah.
And he had heard some of the stories back when, how, and even today, how some people really didn't want to deal with people who were gay or LGBTQIA plus in their covens. It's a lot different today. A lot more people are open about it, but at one time It was very controversial.
Yeah.
And some people would frankly flat out not admit you if you were gay.
Ridiculous.
And it was very, very, very sad in that
Yeah.
type of sense. And in our group, for example, both in Horsa and Sacred Pentagraph, there's not an insistence on Kate, like for example, when he went out in the greater community, he was like, people were really talking about this polarity thing, like it's the be all end all of
Right.
everything. And and it was a lot more controversial of a topic than he would have imagined. And I know he could speak for himself on this, but he when he was learning in our group, he had realized, it was like, this really is not a controversial or crazy topic at all.
Yeah.
It was never made to feel that like that was the be all end all, never made to feel that you were different just because you had a different gender or orientation
Yeah.
than somebody else. But he got quite a shock when he started seeing that out in the greater different communities and things like that. So he had like asked me a lot of questions, and he will tell you that I kind of um not pressured him into it, but strongly encouraged him to look into it, because
Voluntold him.
yeah, voluntold. And a lot of it was like he was asking all these questions, and I gave the classic example of, well, you should do something about that, shouldn't you?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
why don't you think on this and come up with something related to that? And so it's very connected to exactly what we're doing in Sacred Pentagraph and Horsa, but it has the added bonus of looking at it from a gay men's mystery lens and
Yeah.
kind of crafting that into it. Like, just because the line of gala is men does not mean, for example, that the mother goddess is exorcised from that. It is still Wicca,
Hmm.
but at the same time, they're also exploring the male mysteries on top of that. And
Yeah.
he didn't also do it in a bubble. He had um, everybody's input that wanted to have input into what he was writing and creating, including a lot of the high priestesses and even some of the straight men that were connected to the group. So it wasn't created in a vacuum, but was brought out as something slightly in different focus, with everyone's full support and understanding and contribution, so that they could be able to um, have that connection back to where they had come from. So, and that's taken off and has grown, and there are lots of folks that are learning it.
Yeah.
There are a number of covens around the U.S. There's people internationally that learn from Casey, um, and that are carrying that on as well. So that's been widely successful and happily received out there.
Yeah. It's awesome. From what I see on the website, and definitely what I read in his book, Garbed in Green, he's
Hmm.
definitely a great community leader, teacher, and writer. Garbed in Green is a fantastic book. And kind of to bring it back to you, you are kind of involved in all those things. And like I said, he lists you as a mentor, which has to be gratifying, um, because these great things you're either a part of carrying forward, or listed in the newer groups like Gala. And I think it's pretty awesome how you were talking about Wicca and having being like the oak tree, having its roots and reaching up to the sky. You're yeah, it's a good way of describing what you do as well, because you've got these roots. You also your teachings or your mentoring or however you want to look at it is also growing, spreading, and it's really cool to see.
Oh yeah, like it's been quite amazing and very, very I don't know how the best way to describe it, but harmonizing when other folks that have been able to pick things up be able to learn and create, because even though we have, a structure and a setup and pass down rituals as well, that does not mean that everything stays in stone. Like I
Right.
always kind of describe, like, because like you hear sometimes people will say that when they're skeptical in joining a coven, they might say, well, I don't want to join a coven and be part of some tradition out there because I don't want to be stuck in doing it just one way.
Sure.
And it's like, and that's it. I don't know how others see it, but at least how I see it is I see your tradition as your foundation.
Yeah.
So if you're building a house, like the foundation is the base in which your house stands on. You still have to pick out the draperies and pick out the furniture, paint the walls, um, and design your magical life in the way that is right for you.
Hmm.
It's not limiting in any type of sense. But when people get together in group, it gives like a sense of not only a unifying thing that everybody understands when they're in the group, but it also builds power, or what like Rupert Sheldrake described as like morphic resonance over
Sure.
time by the repeated acts of doing the same ritual over and over and over. But
Yeah.
at the same time, as I said, that's only the foundation on which you stand. A large part of your practice that you do on the everyday, you're going to develop in ways that you are led to do, that you may
Yeah.
be inspired to carry out. Like as somebody, when you're somebody who's initiated in part of the priesthood of Wicca, you there's no part of your life that's like not disintegrated from your path as a witch. It would be like telling somebody that they're only their chosen religion on one day of the week. uh there's no
Yeah.
part of the person that it's not integrated into various parts of their life. And part of that integration, where it's very much part of your life, does not mean that you're putting on all the robes and capes and doing the prescribed ritual from the book every day of the week. There are other parts of that, like other parts of inward meditation that's done every day, various
Sure.
types of concentration that gets done. And it's something that you learn over your lifetime. And some people start really young and some people start much later. Like I started my path as a witch at a very young age, way before I was initiated. um, and I'd never look back.
Yeah. And I tell you what, if I knew there was so much magic going on in PA, I probably would have never left.
Yes, it's always been there. In PA, for example, as you probably remember, it's not, the people aren't flashy about the
Yeah.
things that they do. Um, your everyday career person that you might be sitting next to may also be a Wiccan.
Right.
And they're not flashy, they're not putting it in your face, they're not wearing a pentagram necklace that's the size of the hubcap of a car.
Yeah.
They're you know they're not doing some of those types of things, but it's everywhere. Like it's everywhere here in
Yeah.
PA, and it's so ingrained in the culture that even like central Pennsylvania, as you know, like Lancaster, Berks County, Dauphin
Yeah.
County, they used to call that the hex belt,
Right.
you know, because of all the magic that was in the area. But you know, as I said, there, you know, the people are not flashy about it.
Right.
And there's nothing wrong with being flashy about it and
Thank you.
finding that expression. It's just a different way. It's just a different way.
Yeah, thank you for saying it's okay to be flashy. I may have and maybe still do wear hood ornament hubcap size pentagrams.
And it's totally cool. I mean, to me, I think that's totally awesome. People who are able to or desire to be flashy with the hubcap pentagram, totally fine. Um,
Well, this is
totally.
Vegas. That's how we do things in Vegas.
Yes. Oh yeah. And you know that works. That works there, you know. And finding that harmony in your environment, as I was talking about earlier, I think is very important. So some place like Vegas where everything's in neon lights and everything's flashing and is very showy.
Yeah.
Of course, you have a pentagram the size of a hubcap. I would expect nothing less in Las Vegas. You know, where you might not have that, like, you know, in various parts of rural Pennsylvania,
Yeah.
you know, where there are not very many neon lights flashing, you
Right.
know, and you know, you're getting driving directions where you know you drive 2 miles and you pass the red barn and
Yes.
you take a left
Yeah.
and you'll see a large silage silo like
Yep.
on the left. If you see that, you've gone too far. Back
Yeah.
up and you'll go down the dirt road that's it's very different, but being in harmony with the place that you live, I think is very important. So, oh, totally. Be as
Yeah.
flashy as you like. I think it's awesome.
We when I was growing up on the East Shore, and I was very skate punk, atheist, teen anarchist, so I really wasn't looking for it, I guess. So I would have never known
Yeah.
if I was sitting next to a Wiccan or whatever. But half of my family is Pennsylvania German. We got the Star Barn every time you go to the airport in
Yeah.
Lancaster County, of course.
Yep.
On my way to visit the Irish side of my family in Philadelphia, you're going through Amish country, and eating at the diners along the way. You definitely get that Pennsylvania German feel. If I knew about Erglave back in the day, um, I mean,
Mhm.
that kind of stuff would have been right up my alley, and would
Yeah.
have, I said, thanks to a book of pagan rituals that I bought in Bell Book and Candle, saved my soul. And if I would have known about the witchcraft and the Pennsylvania German heathenry that's going on, yeah, I might not have ever left, because I was Pennsylvania is just so beautiful and so magical that I could feel it, even though I really didn't believe in anything.
Oh yeah, like there's something in the psyche and there's something in the landscape. And you know it probably worked out like in the best way for you
Oh yeah,
that you maybe you didn't know as much about it at the time, because you may not have landed where you landed. Like one piece of advice I always give to seekers if they ask in searching for a coven, I always say don't seek out a specific tradition. Get to know the people and find the people that you can really get on with,
sure.
and then ask them ask them then about their covenant tradition and stuff over time. You don't have to set out and say, I'm going to be this specific tradition.
Yeah.
And that's exactly what I'm going to search out and find. Well, you may find that that may not be right for you
Right.
if you're searching out just a specific tradition. And even within traditions, covens can be very vastly different from each
Sure.
other, even within the same tradition. The
Right.
rituals may look the same, but like the focus and the flow and what the interests are in that group may be very vastly different for somebody. And even if you weren't seeking, for example, like Wicca itself, you were searching out like a more magical, or even like something that is a little bit more mystical, that's always all there as
Yeah.
well that you can find. And a lot of people here, like for example in Pennsylvania, grow up with many stories and with many tales of people that practiced folk magic in their families.
Yeah.
We're not talking, they weren't Wiccans, they weren't descended from some ancient pagan religion like some books on the market that will tell you that that's not true.
Right.
Um, they but they practice various forms of folk magic in itself. Like in my own life, like my earliest remembrance of an interest in witchcraft or the magical was around the time of 5 or 6 years old. Anytime I could pick up a colored pencil or crayon and be able to draw, all I drew were witches, suns and moons watching down over them, stars to the skies, and a lot of times witches riding on trains. I don't
Right.
know why they were riding on trains, but they were. Now, that may sound very fantastical or unbelievable, but like 6 years ago, thankfully, my older sister saved those drawings
Oh, cool.
and gave them back to me about 5 or 6 years ago. And so I still have them. It's like here, I do have these drawings. And I wasn't raised in any type of um, Wiccan family or any type of anything like that. It's
Yeah.
very normal Pennsylvania type of, family experience. Um, but, it was not uncommon to grow up, and as you get older as well, to talk about predictive dreams that you've had.
Uh-huh.
There's always talk about dreams that you've had and premonitions. There was always talk about that you make your own happiness. That like if you're upset about something, get yourself out of a funk, pick yourself up by your bootstraps. You can do it. Very can do Pennsylvania attitude.
Right.
If you want something to happen that's good for you, you should think hard about it when you first wake up in the morning. These types of things. Seeing sightings of and communicating with deceased loved ones was a topic that was frequently discussed. And all of those things like was stated matter of factly. Now obviously it wasn't like an everyday conversation, but when they occurred they were stated matter of factly, like they were just a matter, like part and parcel of life. And growing up and as I got older, I was able to talk about it a lot more fully with my older sister, who was very willing to talk about, like, dive a little bit deeper into these types of feelings. Now, she
Uh-huh.
doesn't have like an accepted um, or adopted religion at all, but like she still heavily believes in um, psychic insight, dreams, and communicating with the dead. So,
Wow.
as when I got older, for example, and I started gaining a lot more knowledge and vocabulary around some of what we call things, it was always amazing to like hear my sister describe what she was doing because she didn't have the vocabulary. She never read a book on the subject, not interested in reading a book on the subject.
Uh-huh.
but accepts this as just a matter of life. So I would say things to my sister. I'd say, like, when you receive, like, these visions, like, when do they most happen? Like, what are the circumstances behind when these things happen? And she would say things like, well, like, the biggest time that they happen, that time period when you are falling asleep but you're not yet asleep.
Yeah.
Like, you're not yet asleep but you're still kind of awake but you're not awake. I'm like, yep, I know exactly what you mean. She goes, that's when most of these happen. And in my brain, already having learned some of the vocabulary, I'm like, oh, she's talking about, like, these altered states of consciousness, the trance
Right.
state, the hypnagogic states, the various brain waves of consciousness, like the beta, alpha, delta, theta,
Yeah.
and going down into that. And I'm like, this is very, and became a very cool exercise to talk to her about some of these things, because this was somebody, like, as I said, not studying, somebody who has not studied this, not read a book on the subject, or interested in reading a book on the subject, but experiences this, and hearing them describe it, they describe it in a very different way. They describe it from experience, not from, a learned book
Right.
itself.
Right.
And that was really amazing. Now, what really kind of cemented for me, like, as I said earlier, 5 or 6 years old, having, like, all I wanted to draw were these witches and these things. And thankfully, as I said, my sister saved these and I have them.
That's so cool.
What really cemented it for me, where I began more serious interest in study, was I was around 11 or 12 years old. Like, so fast forward a number of years,
Yeah.
11 or 12, I'm at my oldest aunt's house, and she's teaching my Uncle Marvin a folk charm.
Wow.
And I'm, like, looking from the living room into the dining room, and I'm, like, intrigued by what is happening here.
That's cool.
And, she was not any type of practitioner. She probably would have described herself as a lapsed Catholic, right? She still had some of those beliefs, but, like,
Yeah.
she was more a lapsed Catholic, and she's teaching him a folk charm. So I'm just like, oh my gosh, wow, I am so excited. And a short time after that, it was our family reunion, and I said, do you remember that thing you were teaching, my uncle? And she says, yep. And I said, would you be willing to show that to me? She says, yes, I will. So she took me aside at the family reunion. We were in a corner by ourselves. And she says, all right, what I'm going to show you is called blowing fire. And it's a charm for putting out a burn. And this charm is used, like, if you burn yourself in the stove, on the stove in the kitchen, or you just have, like, some kind of minor burn and need to cure it. And it had a very fanciful name, blowing fire, right? And
Wow.
so she said, you can only teach, she goes, I'm showing you this because, only a woman can teach a man these charms, and only a man can teach a woman, and you have to believe it.
Oh, wow.
She goes, you have to believe it strongly.
Polarity, even with that.
What?
I said polarity, even with that, with your aunt.
I know. I was really,
That's really cool.
later on, I was so surprised, like, and that became very common in Pennsylvania folk magic. You hear a lot of people who are powwows, that practice that, like, things of a similar nature, that talk in that type of way, of man to woman, woman to man. And
Wow.
she goes, okay, I'm going to repeat the charm, and I need you to memorize it. I said, okay. So she told me the charm, I memorized it, and then she demonstrated it on me. And she goes, okay, now demonstrate it back. So I demonstrated it back. And that was the first charm I had learned. I felt like I was like floating on cloud nine because I'm like, I'm like, oh my gosh, these things out there are real. And as I said, it was just a simple folk charm. Nothing fantastical. Like, it's not any type of passed down family tradition. This is not any carryover from neo-paganism of any sort. These were just simple folk charms that probably most likely became very popular post-Reformation times. You know,
Did she ever tell you where she learned it?
no, and I never asked. And I never thought of asking where she learned it at the time because I was an 11 or 12-year-old kid. I was just happy that she was showing me this and feeling ecstatic.
Yeah.
Now, I will say when she passed away, many years later into my adulthood, and when she passed away, I did ask my cousin, her son, if he had found anything written down related to charming and various folk charms. And I told him what my aunt or his mother had taught me. And he had told me that he hadn't seen anything going through her stuff. So maybe these were things that she had written down, but like they're so tucked away in something else. Or maybe she never wrote these down. I don't know. But I did make an effort to find out by asking my cousin if he found anything.
Yeah.
Um, because like I mean, it just was very out of the blue when I oversaw her teaching my uncle this
Yeah.
and then getting up the courage to ask her. Now from that moment on, I was so excited and so ecstatic. I'm like, okay, there has to be more. So as an 11 or 12-year-old kid, like then I'm going to my local bookstore and they had a new age section there in the bookstore. And I started looking on the bookshelves, looking through stuff, and I wasn't very interested in a lot that was on the bookshelf. So I started going through the bookshop's catalog and finding like the the books that more so appealed to me,
Yeah.
that weren't like the more cookie cutter books that you see on the shelves. Like I was never interested in that. Like never. I had like an immediate kind of turn off from some of the more cookie cutter books out there.
Huh.
And they would order these books in for me. And that's when I would there'd be occasions where I'd find one on the bookshelf that spoke to me, but for the most part, everything I was buying were books they'd have to order because they're not ones that they would normally carry in the store,
Yeah.
in the new age section. So that's where I started studying very intensely at that age, like 11 and 12 years old, buying these
Wow.
books. And what cemented it even more was when I turned 16 and I was finally able to drive, I started going to this local herb shop that was also in my town. And the herb shop itself was in a Victorian mansion that was owned by the owner of the business. She owned this Victorian mansion. The herb shop was there. And of course, the store had all the normal teas and tinctures and herbal pills and capsules, all the
Yeah.
normal things you'd find at like a store like that. But they also sold supplies in witchery and spell casting
Nice.
related to herbalism. And you remember buying my first crystal ball there? I mean, it
Wow.
wasn't an occult store, it was just an herbal store, on herbs.
Yeah.
Um, and remember buying all sorts of spell items there and candles and herbs, not just for medicinal uses, but magical. And started trying some of them out that were safe to do so. So I felt like I was hot stuff. I'd hop in my Mustang and drive drive to the herb shop like every
Nice.
other weekend to be able to buy these things. And as you remember being in Pennsylvania, you have a lot of access to forests,
Yeah.
fields, places.
Right.
So it was very common almost every other day to go out by yourself in the forests and the fields and find these herbs that seem so mysterious and
Sure.
magical. Going out collecting American mandrake, which is mayapple,
Mhm.
wild columbine, you know, bloodroot, finding that out in the woods, collecting that, bringing that back, and being able to have like a little safe bonfire outside and boiling them up in cauldrons and burning them, and learning the use of the folklore behind these herbs, like what they were good for, what they were reputed to do
Yeah.
throughout history. It was it was truly awesome, and there's there's a lot of that I sometimes miss as a newbie. Like when you're a newbie, there's such this amazing sense of wonder.
Right.
And every day I still have that same sense of wonder. It's just a very different sense of wonder now.
Sure.
Um
And if I had known anything about herbs when growing up in PA, I might not have gotten poison ivy so
yes, yes, you would have found very frequently jewelweed.
much.
Yeah, like have you seen jewelweed before?
I don't know. I
You
like
might
I
not have.
if it's green, it looks like poison ivy to me now.
Oh gosh. Well, I can see that, like, especially now that living in Las Vegas is it's a desert. So
Oh
the
yeah.
plant life and the outside life, the harmony that you get in touch with nature is very different. But
Sure.
like here, what we do now, if you get poison ivy, and it's not like a bad case where you have it in your lungs where you've
Mhm.
breathed it in and it's an allergic reaction. I'm talking just
The skin.
general poison ivy on your
Yeah.
skin. Um, Usually near where poison ivy grows, there's a plant called jewelweed,
Oh.
and it grows about waist high and has these orange flowers on it.
Hmm.
And when you have poison ivy, jewelweed is a remedy for that.
Oh,
You take,
nice.
you cut the stem, you split open the stem, and then you squeeze all the juices like on the poison ivy spots,
Oh
and
wow.
it helps to heal that up, to remedy that quickly.
Oh, that's cool.
um, but like not a lot of people know about jewelweed, but it is a folk remedy
Yeah.
that grows out there. I don't know, obviously you shouldn't put it on yourself if you have very sensitive allergies, but for us it's something that we use, like being able to find jewelweed is amazing. It grows everywhere here too, but if you knew about jewelweed as a kid, it might have been a different story.
Yeah. Yeah. Every summer, and I love the woods, and I mean PA. When you said you said jewelweed grows everywhere. It's like everything grows everywhere. It's like there's forests everywhere. It's so beautiful. And when I tell people um, out here, kind of what it's like in the fall, especially, it's spooky when
Yeah,
the trees suddenly become skeletal and the air gets so cold so quick, and hints of smoke from somebody's fire or leaves fire. Maybe they rake up their leaves and then burn them, or and
yeah,
it really Halloween, super spooky. When I was a kid, and it's magical. I mean, PA is magical like all year, but for me, especially in the fall, my memories of it really just spooky and magical. Everything seemed haunted. I mean, it's just such a magical place.
yeah. And since it is an older state, was originally one of the colonies. There's a longer history than in other areas where not only that could build up, but urban legends added to it,
Yeah,
and um, all sorts of things get added to the amazing stories that get told around the fire. Um, that's something that like is really fun to be able to have here is little outdoor fires. And here in PA, it's very trendy. Every yard, every place you go, they have fires all summer, right?
Sure.
Um, some of my friends on the West Coast, like in California, are always jealous of like our photos of our little fires that we
Yeah.
have. And because obviously, you know, that's not something you can do in certain environments.
Right.
But, you know, in an environment with that is a lot more wet, where it's safe, you know, to do those, you know, and by following whatever local ordinances that are in the neighborhood, you
Right.
can have, you know, fires, and nobody would bat an eye. Like, nobody bats an eye when you say that you got together with the group of your friends around a bonfire.
Yeah.
You know, nobody would even suspect you even as a Wiccan, just
Right.
saying that, because it is so normal to do those types of things throughout summer and autumn months,
Yep.
that it's just one of those things that's ingrained. Now, most people just go outside around the fire with a glass of wine and maybe, you know, some cheese, a cheese board or something like that,
Yeah.
and just enjoy that. And if you're lucky, maybe they'll make s'mores. But
Yep.
like, you know, if you're a Wiccan, that holds another purpose as well.
Right.
So nobody would suspect that even if you were doing that. At
Yep.
least here where you can do that safely.